The infrared signature bloomed white-hot on every tactical screen from Bagram to Tampa, a sprawling heat pattern that shouldn't exist in the Hindu Kush at 3:47 hours. 12 Navy SEALs, call sign Trident 6, had pushed deep into the Korangal Valley on a time-sensitive target, a high-value individual linked to 3 embassy bombings. The insertion had been clean, the approach textbook. Then the radios went silent. Not the crackle of interference, not the hiss of jamming. Just silence, the kind that makes generals lean forward in their chairs and captains forget to breathe. At the Joint Operations Center, Major Kellerman stood before a wall of screens, watching the drone feed with the hollow expression of a man who'd sent too many teams into valleys they didn't return from. The thermal bloom suggested heavy contact, possibly RPGs, definitely chaos. Standard protocol demanded immediate quick reaction force deployment, but the nearest Apache gunships were 30 minutes out, tangled in a refueling nightmare at Fob, Michigan. The SEALs' last confirmed position put them in a natural amphitheater of rock and death, surrounded by elevated fighting positions that had swallowed Soviet convoys whole 4 decades prior. The silence stretched. Somewhere in that pixelated gray landscape, 12 of America's finest were fighting without air support, without resupply, without even the comfort of knowing anyone heard their last transmission. Kellerman's hand hovered over the emergency frequency toggle. Behind him, communications specialists cycled through every bandwidth, searching for the encrypted burst transmission that would confirm Trident 6 was still operational. Nothing. The Taliban knew these mountains the way a surgeon knows anatomy, every ridge a pressure point, every canyon a killing field. The drone's sensor suite picked up muzzle flashes now, dozens of them, forming a contracting noose around a cluster of heat signatures huddled behind inadequate cover. Kellerman reached for the satellite phone that would wake up a 3-star general with news that would end careers and break families. That's when the radio sparked to life. Not on the SEAL frequency, not on any of the standard military channels. The voice came through on guard, the international emergency frequency that everyone monitored but rarely used in combat. The transmission was steady, almost conversational, with an Oklahoma drawl that seemed absurdly calm given what the drone feed was showing. Any station this net, this is Warthog 1. I've got visual on 12 friendlies taking effective fire in the Korangal. I'm 2 minutes out. Authenticate your emergency. Over. Kellerman grabbed the handset so fast he knocked over his coffee. Nobody was supposed to be airborne in that sector. The air tasking order had been scrubbed clean after the refueling delay. He checked the identification friend or foe display. One contact, low and fast, coming from an impossible angle. The transponder code was valid but ancient, attached to an A-10 Thunderbolt that, according to every database, shouldn't have been within 200 miles of Afghanistan. Kellerman keyed the mic, his voice tight. Warthog 1, authenticate Hotel 69er Tango. A pause, then that same unhurried drawl. Hotel 69er Tango confirmed. Call me Warthog. I've got a full combat load and a bad attitude. Where do you need the hate? The major glanced at his watch officer, who was frantically pulling up aircraft manifests on a side terminal, his face registering confusion then something close to disbelief. He scribbled on a notepad and held it up. A-10 tail number checks to 354th Fighter Squadron, pilot KIA Helmand Province 2019. Kellerman's blood went cold. The drone feed showed the aircraft now, a dark cruciform shape against the lighter sky, wings heavy with ordnance, flying a profile so low the landing gear almost scraped ridgelines. Whoever was at the controls flew like they'd been born in these mountains, exploiting every thermal, every shadow, approaching the combat zone from the one angle the Taliban wouldn't expect, because it required threading between 2 peaks with barely a wingspan of clearance. Warthog 1, be advised, Trident 6 is at grid November Delta 714823, danger close to multiple structures, heavy small arms and possible RPG teams in treeline 200 meters north. The response came back immediate. Copy all. Trident 6, if you can hear me on this net, pop purple smoke and get small. Danger close doesn't scare me, but I need to know where you're not. On the ground, through the green phosphor of night vision, Staff Sergeant Marcus Hale heard the transmission through a radio that shouldn't have been working. The Taliban had detonated an IED 15 minutes into the firefight, cooking off their primary communications rig and half their ammunition. The backup radio was damaged, stuck receiving on guard frequency only, unable to transmit. Hale didn't know who Warthog 1 was, didn't care. He grabbed the last smoke grenade from Petty Officer Rodriguez's vest, pulled the pin, and threw it into the small depression where his team had formed a perimeter. Purple smoke billowed upward, visible on infrared and naked eye alike, a desperate flag in the darkness. The incoming fire intensified immediately. The Taliban knew what smoke meant. Rounds snapped overhead, impacting the rocks with sparks and whining ricochets. Hale pressed himself flatter, feeling Rodriguez's shoulder against his own, the kids breathing too fast, teetering on the edge of panic. "Air's coming," Hale said, not sure if he believed it. The radio crackled again. Purple smoke identified. Trident 6, keep your heads down. Gun run in 30 seconds. This will be loud. The A-10 materialized like something from a fever dream, dropping below the ridgeline and turning hard, wings banking vertical to fit through a gap Hale wouldn't have attempted in a helicopter. The aircraft's silhouette was unmistakable, ungainly, brutal, designed around a gun so large it seemed impossible anything could fly while carrying it. The distinctive turbofan whine became a roar, then a shriek as the pilot pushed the throttles forward. The GAU-8 Avenger opened up with a sound that defied description. 7 barrels rotating at 3,900 rounds per minute, each 30 round the size of a milk bottle, depleted uranium tips designed to kill tanks. The gun's report was a continuous thunderclap, a deep BRRRT that resonated in the chest cavity and made the earth shudder. Tracers arced downward in a perfect stream, every 5th round visible, stitching across the tree line where muzzle flashes had been winking seconds before. Trees exploded into splinters. Rock faces shattered. The air filled with dust and pulverized stone. The Taliban firing position simply ceased to exist, replaced by smoking craters and silence. The pulled up hard, banking away with a grace that contradicted its appearance, climbing just high enough to clear the eastern ridge before circling back. Hale realized he'd been holding his breath. Around him, his team began returning fire, emboldened, pushing back against insurgents who were now disorganized and reeling. Warthog 1, good hits, Kellerman transmitted from the operations center, his voice betraying relief he shouldn't show. Multiple enemy casualties confirmed. Trident 6 is maneuvering. The response came back calm as before. Copy. I've got 6 Mavericks and a bunch of Hydras left. Where else do you need me? For the next 17 minutes, Warthog 1 became the angel of death in the Korangal Valley. The pilot worked in silence mostly, speaking only to confirm targets or acknowledge direction. Kellerman watched the thermal feed with growing amazement. This wasn't standard close air support procedure. This was artistry, a level of precision and aggression he'd seen maybe twice in 15 years. The A-10 orbited the valley like a predator, striking Taliban reinforcements before they could reach the fight, destroying a DSHK heavy machine gun position that had been harassing the SEALs from a cave entrance, even dropping a GBU-38 guided bomb on a compound a kilometer away where thermal imaging showed personnel staging for a counterattack. Each run was textbook perfect. Each weapon release was exactly on target. And through it all, that voice remained steady, professional, almost bored. When the Apache gunships finally arrived, trailing rotor wash and apologies, the fight was effectively over. Trident 6 was moving to an extraction point, their casualties stabilized, the Taliban scattered or dead. The Apache took up escort positions, their pilots trading confused glances when they heard Warthog 1 on the radio coordinating handoff. Warthog 1, this is Saber 2-1, we've got the ball. Thanks for keeping our guys alive. Who are you exactly? A pause longer than before. When the voice came back, it carried a note of something, not quite sadness, not quite amusement. Just a guardian angel, Saber. You boys take care of them. Warthog 1 RTB. The A-10 waggled its wings once, a gesture visible on the infrared feed, then turned west and climbed, disappearing into the darkness. At Bagram, Major Kellerman sat heavily in his chair, suddenly aware of how much adrenaline had been coursing through his system. His watch officer was on 3 different phones simultaneously, trying to figure out how an aircraft with a dead pilot's registration had appeared out of nowhere and saved 12 SEALs. Every airbase between Kandahar and Bagram claimed no knowledge of any A-10 operations in that sector. The tanker aircraft that should have been supporting any mission reported no contact with a Warthog call sign. The aircraft's transponder code, while valid, belonged to a specific airframe that records showed was currently undergoing depot maintenance in Utah. None of it made sense. "Sir," the watch officer said slowly, hanging up his last phone. "I found something. That tail number. It was flown by Captain Rena Voss. She was hit by a MANPAD over Helmand in 2019. Aircraft went down hard. She died en route to Landstuhl." Kellerman felt the hair on his arm stand up. Pull her file. 20 minutes later, he was reading through a service record that made his own accomplishments look pedestrian. Captain Rena Voss, call sign Warthog, 3 combat deployments, 2 distinguished flying crosses, a silver star for staying in the fight for 40 minutes after taking catastrophic damage to protect a Marine patrol. The citations described a pilot who flew with an almost supernatural calm under fire, who seemed to anticipate enemy movements, who treated danger close as a personal challenge. The last entry was an after-action report from her final mission. She'd been supporting a Marine reconnaissance team when a Stinger missile found her aircraft. The A-10 had absorbed damage that should have killed her instantly. Engine gone, hydraulics failing, the cockpit filling with smoke. She'd stayed on station anyway, making 3 more gun runs before attempting to limp back to base. The aircraft broke apart at 8,000 feet. The Marines she'd been protecting wrote letters to her family. One of them described her last radio transmission. "Tell my boys in the 354th that Warthog's just changing altitude. Keep the coffee hot." Now, Kellerman stared at the frozen drone footage showing an A-10 that shouldn't exist, flown by a pilot 6 years dead, and tried to reconcile the impossible with the undeniable fact that 12 SEALs were alive because of that voice on the radio. He wasn't a superstitious man. He believed in physics, in training, in the mundane explanations that usually lurked behind military mysteries. But he'd also spent enough time in combat zones to know that sometimes the universe had a sense of poetry, a way of balancing accounts. He wrote his report carefully, sticking to facts he could prove. An unidentified had provided emergency close air support. Trident 6 had been extracted with 0 KIA. The aircraft's origin remained under investigation. He left out the part about the dead pilot. Some things didn't need to be in official records. But word spread anyway, the way stories always spread in the military. By dawn, half of Bagram knew something strange had happened in the Quarangle. By noon, the story had reached other bases. Fighter pilots in ready rooms from Al Udeid to Incirlik found themselves discussing it over coffee, comparing it to other tales of unexplained phenomena in combat zones. The rational ones dismissed it as confusion, misidentified aircraft, stress-induced hallucination. Others weren't so sure. Staff Sergeant Hale didn't care about the explanations. 3 days after the firefight, recovered and debriefed at Bagram, he found himself at the base memorial wall, looking at the names of pilots who died supporting ground operations. Captain Rena Voss's name was there, etched in stone, along with her call sign and the date she'd gone down. Someone had left a small toy Warthog figurine at the base of the wall. Hale added his own tribute, a spent purple smoke canister with "Thank You" written in black marker. It seemed inadequate, but it was all he had. Rodriguez found him there, still looking pale but recovering. The kid had nightmares now, waking up to phantom gunfire, but he'd come through intact. "You think it was really her?" Rodriguez asked quietly. Hale considered the question. He was a practical man, a Navy SEAL who'd built a career on preparation and probability. But he'd also heard that voice on the radio, calm and sure, promising salvation and delivering it. He'd watched that A-10 thread impossible gaps and place ordnance with surgical precision in darkness and chaos. "I think," Hale said slowly, "that sometimes the best pilots are the ones who never stop flying, even when they should." Rodriguez nodded like that made sense. Maybe it did. They stood in silence for a moment, two warriors paying respect to a third, separated by service branch and death, but united by the unspoken covenant that bound all who'd faced fire together. Back at the 354th Fighter Squadron's home station in Idaho, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Hendricks was having a strange morning. She'd received a classified message from CENTCOM requesting information about any deployed A-10s operating under the Warthog call sign. The answer was simple: none. The squadron had no aircraft in theater. Their deployment wasn't scheduled for another 4 months. She'd sent back a polite negative and thought nothing more of it until one of her crew chiefs knocked on her office door. "Ma'am, you should see this." In the hangar, mechanics stood in a loose circle around an aircraft that had been in maintenance status for weeks. Tail number 810964, Captain Voss's old bird. The aircraft that had been with her when she died, recovered from the crash site and slowly rebuilt over years. A labor of love by crew chiefs who'd respected the pilot who'd pushed it to its absolute limits. The plane sat on its landing gear, panels off, systems exposed, definitively non-operational. Except now there was dust on the wings, the kind of fine-grained dust found in Afghan valleys. And in the cockpit, sitting on the ejection seat, was a purple smoke canister. Hendricks climbed the crew ladder on legs that didn't feel entirely steady. She picked up the canister, reading the marker inscription, her mind trying to construct a rational explanation. Someone's joke, a tribute from a visiting airman, anything but what the evidence suggested. She looked at the gun muzzle, the 7 barrels of the GAU-8 that defined the aircraft's entire purpose. The barrels were clean, freshly serviced. But when she ran her finger along the inside edge, she felt residue, the particular grit of propellant burn. The gun had been fired. Recently. The crew chief who'd followed her up the ladder was an old master sergeant named Kowalski, 28 years in the Air Force, skeptical of everything. He looked at the residue on Hendricks's finger, then at the dust on the wings, then out toward the Idaho sky as if searching for answers in the clouds. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I've been working on this bird since we got it back. It hasn't been out of this hangar, hasn't had a pilot in the seat. Hell, half the avionics aren't even connected." Hendricks wanted to argue, to assert the rational explanation that had to exist. Instead, she found herself remembering Captain Voss. They'd overlapped for 6 months before Voss's final deployment. Hendricks, then a major, had been impressed by the younger pilot's calm competence. The way she flew like the aircraft was an extension of her own body. Voss had never been loud or boastful. She'd simply been the best, and everyone knew it. "Kowalski," Hendricks said slowly, "I need you to keep this quiet. Run a full diagnostic on this aircraft. Document everything, but quietly." The master sergeant nodded. He understood. Some mysteries were better handled outside official channels, at least until someone figured out what questions to ask. Hendricks took the smoke canister back to her office. She logged it as recovered property and filed a report that was factual but vague, the kind of document that would satisfy bureaucracy without inviting too much scrutiny. Then she pulled Voss's personnel file and read through it again, looking for something she might have missed. The woman who emerged from the pages was competent, dedicated, and private. Voss had grown up in Oklahoma, learned to fly in her father's Cessna, joined the Air Force because she wanted to serve. She'd chosen the A-10 specifically because it supported troops on the ground, because it was the least glamorous and most essential mission in combat aviation. Her efficiency reports were exemplary. Her peers respected her. Her subordinates would have followed her anywhere. But there was a note in her psychological evaluation, written after her second deployment. The Air Force psychologist had flagged a comment Voss made during a standard counseling session. "Sometimes I think I'll fly these mountains forever. Even when I'm gone, I'll still be here watching over them." The psychologist had noted it as poetic but not concerning, a sign of strong commitment rather than instability. Now, reading it again, Hendricks felt a chill. Had Voss somehow known? Had she understood something about herself, about her connection to the mission, that transcended normal service? The question haunted her for days. She found herself in the hangar more often, watching the maintenance crews work on the aircraft that shouldn't have flown but somehow had. She checked the news from Afghanistan obsessively, looking for more reports of unexplained air support. Nothing. If Warthog 1 flew again, it was in silence, leaving no trace except lives saved. A month after the Korangal incident, Hendricks received a visitor. Major Kellerman, on temporary duty from Afghanistan, requested a meeting. They sat in her office, two officers trying to make sense of the impossible. Kellerman brought his own evidence, the drone footage, radio recordings, testimony from the SEALs who'd been there. Hendricks shared the purple smoke canister, the dust samples, the gun residue analysis that confirmed recent firing. They laid it all out like detectives working a case that defied conventional investigation. "There's a rational explanation," Kellerman said, sounding like he was trying to convince himself. "Has to be." "Of course," Hendricks agreed. Then she played him the audio recording of Warthog 1's radio transmissions. Kellerman listened, his face unreadable. When it finished, he sat back. "I've heard recordings of Captain Voss, training exercises, mission debriefs. That's her voice, Colonel. I'd stake my career on it." They sat in silence, two pragmatic officers confronting something that didn't fit in their worldview. Finally, Hendricks spoke. "What do we do with this?" Kellerman shrugged. "I've already filed my report. Unidentified aircraft, investigation ongoing. The SEALs are alive. That's what matters. And the truth? The truth is 12 families still have their fathers and husbands and brothers. The truth is Captain Voss died serving her country, and maybe she's still serving it. The truth is I'm not sure truth matters as much as I thought it did." Hendricks appreciated his honesty. They agreed to keep their findings quiet, to let the mystery remain unsolved in official channels, while acknowledging privately that something profound had occurred. In the months that followed, there were other reports. A Marine patrol in Helmand, pinned down and out of options, saved by an A-10 that appeared from nowhere. A special forces team in Syria calling in a danger-close strike and getting support from a Warthog call sign that wasn't on any flight manifest. Each time, the same calm voice, the same impossible precision, the same vanishing act before identification could be confirmed. The incidents were rare enough to avoid pattern recognition in official reports, common enough that a legend began to build among ground troops. If you were in trouble, if the situation was desperate, if you needed a miracle, sometimes the universe sent Warthog. The pilots who flew A-10s began treating the stories with a reverence usually reserved for Medal of Honor recipients. Warthog became a call sign nobody else used, a designation held in reserve for the guardian angel who might or might not exist, but whose presence was felt whenever an A-10 rolled in on a dangerous mission. Captain First Class Michaela Torch Morrison was 3 years into her own A-10 career when she first felt it. She was supporting Army Rangers in Iraq, running gun passes on an ISIS position when she heard a voice on guard frequency. Just 3 words, "Nice shooting, Torch." She checked her tactical display. No other aircraft in range, no ground controller who should know her call sign. Just that voice, Oklahoma drawl, approving and warm. Morrison felt the hair on her neck rise. She'd heard the stories, dismissed them as squadron mythology. Now, alone in her cockpit at 8,000 feet with flak bursting around her, she wasn't so sure. "Warthog," she transmitted, half-hopping for silence. No response. But for the next 20 minutes her aircraft flew like it was on rails. Every shot hit. Every maneuver was perfect. She felt guided, supported, like an invisible hand was steadying her stick. The Rangers extracted without casualties. Morrison landed back at Al-Assad Air Base shaking, unable to explain what had happened. She told her squadron commander, who listened with the expression of someone who'd heard similar stories. "Captain Voss?" Morrison asked. The commander nodded slowly. "We don't put it in reports, can't prove anything, but most of us who fly the Hog long enough have a moment, a feeling, a voice when we need it most. Call it what you want, guardian angel, muscle memory, collective unconscious. Call it Captain Voss. Just know you're not alone up there. None of us are. Morrison thought about that. She joined the Air Force to serve, to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. She flew the A-10 because it was the pure expression of that mission. Ugly, slow, tough, dedicated to keeping soldiers alive. If Captain Voss had been so committed to that mission that even death couldn't stop her, then Morrison understood. That wasn't haunting. That was loyalty. That was love expressed through action, through presence, through the willingness to fly dangerous skis forever if it meant one more patrol made it home. Years passed. The wars continued and evolved, new threats emerging, old ones resurfacing. The A-10 fleet aged, faced repeated retirement attempts, and kept flying because ground troops refused to let it go. And somewhere in that fleet, in the spaces between radio transmissions and the silence of Afghan valleys, Warthog 1 continued to fly. The SEALs who survived the Korangal went on to other missions, other continents, but they all carried purple smoke canisters now, a talisman and a tribute. Staff Sergeant Hale made it to retirement, 23 years of service, countless operations. At his ceremony, someone asked about his closest call. He told the story of the Korangal, of the voice on the radio, of the A-10 that shouldn't have been there. "Do you believe it was really her?" a young SEAL asked. Hale looked up at the sky, clear and blue and infinite. "I believe some people are so good at their job, so committed to the mission, that they transcend normal limits. I believe Captain Voss loved that aircraft and the people she protected more than she feared death. And I believe that if love and duty are strong enough, maybe they don't end just because your heart stops beating." The young SEAL thought about that and nodded, the way people nod when they hear a truth that resonates beyond logic. In the 354th Fighter Squadron, they kept a small memorial in the ready room. Captain Voss's nameplate, her call sign, a photograph of her standing beside her aircraft with that small, satisfied smile of someone who knew exactly who they were and what they were meant to do. Beneath it, someone had written a quote, source unknown: "The best pilots fly forever." New pilots reporting to the squadron learned the story as part of their orientation. Some dismissed it as myth. Others listened carefully, filing it away, hoping they never needed proof but glad to know help might come from unexpected quarters. Master Sergeant Kowalski retired eventually, but before he left, he performed one final maintenance inspection on tail number 810964. The aircraft was flight-ready again, officially. But Kowalski left specific instructions. This bird was only to be flown for proficiency training, never for combat, never deployed. He couldn't explain why, didn't try. The younger mechanics accepted it as the eccentricity of an old crew chief. The older ones understood. Some aircraft were more than metal and systems. Some carried souls. Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks eventually made full colonel, took command of the group, continued shepherding the A-10 community through budget fights and modernization debates. She kept the purple smoke canister in her office, never explaining its significance to visitors but never disposing of it either. Sometimes, late at night when the flight line was quiet, she'd walk out to the hangar where 810964 sat in its protective cocoon. She'd place her hand on the forward fuselage, feeling the cold metal, and whisper, "Thank you," for what she couldn't entirely say. Thanks for serving. Thanks for continuing to serve. Thanks for proving that some bonds between pilot and aircraft, between protector and protected, were stronger than any force the universe could muster. Major Kellerman retired to a quiet life in Virginia, but he never forgot the Korangal. He wrote a book eventually, a memoir of his time managing combat operations. In it, he included a chapter about unexplained phenomena in warfare, about the stories soldiers tell themselves to make sense of chaos. He was careful, never naming Warthog 1 directly, never making claims he couldn't support. But he ended the chapter with a question. What if the best warriors never truly leave? What if dedication and skill create a kind of immortality, not of the body but of purpose? The book did modestly well. Military enthusiasts praised it. Academic reviewers called it sentimental. But ground troops who'd been in combat read it and recognized the truth beneath the careful phrasing. They knew. They'd all heard stories of snipers who still protected their units years after death, of commanders whose leadership echoed through generations, of medics whose compassion saved lives in impossible circumstances. Captain Rena Vos was just one more guardian in a long line of warriors who understood that true service transcended mortality. Rodriguez, the young SEAL who'd nearly panicked in the Quarangle, went on to become a team leader himself. He led men through difficult operations, always conscious of the responsibility he carried. Before dangerous missions, he'd brief his team carefully, ensure they had everything they needed, then add one final note. If things go sideways, call for air support. And if you're really desperate, ask for Warthog. Can't promise anything, but I've seen miracles happen. His men would laugh nervously, not sure if he was serious. But they filed it away, and when one of them did find himself in an impossible situation years later, pinned down in Somalia with air support unavailable, he keyed his radio on guard frequency and said, almost as a prayer, "Warthog 1, if you're out there, we could use some help." Silence answered. The enemy fire continued. The young SEAL prepared for the worst. Then, distant but growing louder, the distinctive whine of turbofans. An A-10 emerged from the haze, flying impossibly low, and the familiar drawl came through his damaged radio. "Heard you boys were having a party. Mind if I crash it?" The gun run that followed was textbook perfect. The extraction was clean. The young SEAL tried to get a tail number, tried to identify the aircraft, but it vanished back into the haze before he could confirm anything. His after-action report mentioned unidentified air support. His commander read it, made a note, and filed it away with the others. The pattern continued. The legend grew. And somewhere above the battlefields where American forces fought and struggled and endured, an A-10 with no identification circled, watching, waiting, ready to answer the call when courage needed support and hope needed reinforcement. Captain Rena Vos had promised to keep the coffee hot. She was keeping other promises too, the ones she'd made when she first put on the uniform, the ones that mattered more than life itself. In the end, perhaps that's what separated the good pilots from the immortal ones. The good ones flew their missions, served their time, and returned to civilian life with honor and satisfaction. The immortal ones found something in the cockpit, in the mission, in the sacred trust between air and ground that became more important than their own survival. They flew not for glory or recognition, but because somewhere below, people needed protecting, and they were uniquely suited to provide it. Warthog 1 had found that truth, embraced it, and become it so completely that even death was just another obstacle to work around, another challenge to overcome with skill and determination. The sky held her now, the way it held all the best pilots eventually. But unlike most, she'd never landed that final time. She'd simply changed altitude, changed frequency, changed the rules about what was possible when duty and love and exceptional skill converged. The SEALs in the Quarangle had been saved by a ghost or a guardian angel or a pilot so committed she transcended normal mortality. The distinction didn't matter. What mattered was the voice on the radio, calm and sure, promising help and delivering it. What mattered was the purple smoke and the BRRRT of the gun and the impossible precision that turned certain death into unlikely survival. Stories like this spread through the military like wildfire, burnished by repetition, embellished by distance, but rooted always in that core truth. Someone had been there when they shouldn't have been, had saved lives that should have been lost, had flown with a skill that transcended normal human limitation. Whether literal or metaphorical, whether ghost or inspiration, Warthog 1 became the guardian, angel every ground unit hoped for, and a few lucky ones actually received. And in the 354th Fighter Squadron, pilots preparing for deployment would tap the nameplate in the ready room, a small ritual of respect and hope. They'd whisper, "Watch over us, Warthog," and mean it with their whole hearts. Because they understood now what Captain Vos had understood, that flying the A-10 wasn't just a job. It was a calling. It was a promise to the soldiers below that someone above had their backs, would stay in the fight no matter the odds, would bring the gun and the hate, and the absolute unwavering commitment to protect American lives. That promise didn't end with a crash in Helmand Province. It continued in every pilot who strapped into the cockpit, embraced the mission, and flew with the dedication Captain Voss had exemplified. She was the standard now, the ideal, the ghost in the machine reminding everyone what excellence and commitment truly meant. The wars eventually wound down as wars do. Troops came home, bases closed, the tempo slowed, but conflicts never truly end, and somewhere always Americans found themselves in danger, needing support, calling for help. And sometimes when the need was greatest and the situation most desperate, when all conventional support was unavailable and hope seemed lost, a voice would crackle over guard frequency. Oklahoma drawl, calm and professional, almost bored. "This is Warthog 1. Heard you needed some hate delivered. Where do you want it?" The smart ones didn't question. They just marked their positions, took cover, and watched the sky. Because miracles were real when they came wrapped in titanium bathtubs and carried 30 salvation. Because Captain Rena Voss had made a promise, and some promises were too important to be broken by something as trivial as death. She flew still, would always fly, guardian angel in a very ugly, very beautiful aircraft, protecting the people she'd sworn to protect. The sky held her. The mission sustained her. And the grateful living remembered her, which is the only real immortality any warrior ever needs.